But the bright spot at the end of this panel is Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, who's here to talk to us about lessons from Trill. Colonel Fram, Bree, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Thomas. Really excited to be here tonight because when I saw that the theme of this convention was national security and transition, I said, I have to put something together. Even if I have to reach back to my nerdy roots to do it, I would be remiss if I didn't. So why me on this topic of leadership and transition? And really, more importantly, this subtitle about, why do transgender leaders thrive in a VUCA galaxy? We're going to look at that through the lens of Trill experiences, but first, a little about the why me question. So really, dreams change, but in some ways they stay the same. So when I was young, I had a friend that dragged me almost kicking and screaming to watch an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation with them. But after that, my future switched in an instant. I went from wanting to study dinosaurs, just like my daughter does today, to immediately I'm going to make the warp engines go. I want to be an engineer. I want to be Geordi. But I didn't see the possibilities in my life at that point. And what turns out, that Geordi wasn't the right example. It was another Starfleet engineer that was who I really was. So now, as the senior ranking out transgender officer within the Department of Defense, I'm Jadzia Dax, and the story of the Trill makes it fit so perfectly. Even though an artist friend of mine said, no, you're really more of a Janeway at this point, I still like to think, I'll wear that blue uniform for a while yet before I put the red one on for the rest of my career. But let's go back and let's talk Trill. Why is it that Trill become such amazing leaders, or even, again, such amazing representatives in the field, whatever it is, that they choose to engage in? So there's species that the Trill in general are kind of a baseline humanoid species. There's nothing all that special about them. But what makes a tiny fraction of their population unique is their ability to host a second symbiotic organism just known as the symbiont. And the symbiont lives far longer than any individual Trill. And when a Trill takes on that symbiont, they have access to the memories and the experiences and everything that their previous host has experienced. And though they have their own personality, their own desires and dreams, when they take on this symbiont, their world explodes. It explodes in a realm of possibilities of what can be done. And if we look back at why is this relevant to leadership? Sure, experience and having all this is relevant, but there's more to it than that. A lot of it is about perspective taking and that ability to see things from multiple different angles. There's that great classic analogy that, a bunch of blind people feeling an elephant, you're going to get very different views of what that is depending on where you are around the elephant. But if you put it all together, you can see the big picture and understand what it is. And in a 1936 interview, F. Scott Fitzgerald, the famous author, when he was asked about what's the test of a first-rate intellect, well, he said it was the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind and at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And so if we talk Trill, you're talking far more than two. They're still very functional and they can see things from so many different angles and be able to attack problems in a way that we might not otherwise do. And in his recent book on grand strategy, John Lewis Gaddis kind of uses that analogy as well in his description of leadership, saying you have to have these two competing views where one is the vision of where am I going and how do I focus on getting to that objective? But there's this other view of I need to look all around me and I need to see what's going on. I need to understand the context and what's changing, what's cropped up. And this clash and this tension between the two of them is really important to actually safely navigate you to where you need to go. And the Trill as leaders as we've seen with the examples on the screen. More recently, you're starting to see it in Discovery episodes. They simply have this ability to navigate these multiple perspectives and come up with solutions that no one else on their own can do. They're like their own individual team. So this perspectives, it really gives them superpowers in a way from their multiple lived experiences and perspectives. So to bring this back to Earth a little bit, who are our Trill? Well, it's kind of trans people. If you talk about folks that can see things from multiple perspectives, as you've had to look at the world through one gender's eyes and another, that's a way of almost embodying this perception. And I could give you all this theory about trans leaders and leadership development, the qualities that make them senior leaders, or even reuse a quote from Liddell Hart to say why diversity is important. But let's not do that, because that's a way different story, and I'd love to get into it in the Q&A if you want. But if sci-fi taught us anything, it's about the power of stories. So I'm going to share just a couple stories in the time we have left about some transgender leaders within our military and the superpowers they developed by going through a transition experience. So I have talked a lot about perspective taking, and this is Lieutenant Commander Blake Dreeman. Blake, as the world perceived him, was one of the first submariners, I'll get that right someday, to integrate submarines when the world thought he was a woman. But Blake later transitioned and got this dramatic perspective shift as he kind of came into the world of the dominant culture within the military. And he's been able to use that shift in perspectives to challenge perceptions, to challenge the way things have always been done, and to use it for a good cause. But still to be able to draw on what those experiences were like before he was recognized as his gender. But there are many more than just that basic of perspective taking. That empathy that you get from seeing things through different lenses. Staff Sergeant Leanne Withrow talks about understanding the struggles of her soldiers, even when there are struggles she hasn't faced or things that she didn't even know might have existed. It allows her to connect with them, develop that empathy that makes her an outstanding leader in the Illinois National Guard. And Lieutenant Chris Moore here on the bottom just spoke yesterday at Pentagon Pride right after the SecDef. Outstanding officer and future leader in the Navy. But when he was told by tweet that his services were likely no longer going to be required in the United States military, he said, hell no. He showed the determination we want in our leaders, that again and again, they are going to prove themselves and say how dedicated they are to the cause of defending the country that they love in. And if he was going to be thrown out, he'd make sure the Navy knew they were losing the best damn surface warfare officer that they had. And he's proven that over and over again. It's not just on our side of the pond. Harry, a field grade officer in the United Kingdom Army, talked about his willingness to challenge policy after he transitioned. And he uses my favorite word, especially when that policy is rubbish. And the confidence he was given by being himself and that ability to make a stand and make a difference. Like, I don't have to hide who I am, but I can also talk about these other things now based on that, at my experiences. Some of these things, though, have kind of a flip side. As we talk communication and connection as a superpower, this vigilance that a lot of trans or gay, lesbian, bisexual folks develop is by being hyper vigilant and having to understand, well, who's in a room as I'm growing up? How do I not out myself? How can I read this audience so that I can either hide or connect? So there's a negative connotation, but there's also that positive of, well, now that I know how to read the room and I can make a connection with what do people actually want to hear? What do they want to see? How can I make that human to human connection that makes people pay attention or that makes me an effective communicator and leader? But we always have to be worried on any of these things about the flip side, because minority stress is a real thing and leaders can burn out before reaching these superpower pinnacles that they can get to. But just a couple more before I wrap up. I want to go back to Chris's experience about authenticity, and that ability to make a team and an individual better when we remove the lying, faking, and hiding that so many of us do in the workplace. When we can set aside that mental energy that we dedicate to protecting ourselves and instead put that on the mission, that makes us all better as we move forward to create national security for this country. And Sergeant Sabrina Bruce, also from the United States Space Force, one of my favorite humans on this planet, she talks about how she can get better simply by accepting responsibility for the actions that previously embarrassed her and embracing that piece of her identity that said, you know what? Now I can go for these things and I'm going to develop as a leader because I've been able to set aside all those things that I was so self-critical about and that held me back. So a lot of these are just scratching the surface on some of those superpowers that are out there that make trans people incredible leaders, or at least give them the potential to be. And us being able to give them that potential is so important. So really, I want to question, where do we go with here? And Geordi gives us the caution of, this is what we don't want to do. We don't want these people like First Sergeant Dana Walker, whose shields were up for her career. She spent that time lying and hiding who she was, and she made bad decisions because of that fear and that, as she says, that inability to concede what may be construed as weakness. We can turn that on its head and use vulnerability as a tool to connect with the people that we work with and the people that we lead. So many situations where if you reveal something about yourself, people are then willing to reveal things to you that allows you to be a better leader, understand what's going on with the team, and make the environment better. But what we want to enable is what this junior officer in the Air Force says, is that where she came out so that others would know that they're not alone and make it possible for them to achieve their goals. Representation matters, whether it's in the sci-fi world or here on Earth. Having people that you can look up to and see that there are possibilities is just as incredible as that world of possibilities that opens up when a Trill gets their symbiont and all of a sudden sees things from 9, 10, or more different perspectives. It's an incredible ability to look up and say, you know what? I can do that someday. So I have one final ask from you from the Star Trek world in relation to trans rights. If the Klingons can get it right, I would hope that all of us can too. Because when Kor met Jadzia Dax and didn't recognize who she was, he then immediately self-corrected and embraced her for who she is right now. And if you can do that for the trans folks in your organization, for the other minorities, for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, the African Americans, the Hispanics, whoever might be there, embrace them for who they are. And they are going to be dedicated to you, dedicated to your team, and dedicated to the mission. And with that, I look forward to your questions and a fruitful discussion as we go forward.
Thanks so much, Bree, for that incredibly inspiring presentation, and I should say a well-timed one at that, given the month that we're in, celebrating all things trans rights in the entire community. So thank you very much.